Hi, in this video we are going to show you how to thread this embroidery machine, Happy's HCS2 12 needle Voyager. This threading procedure is the same for all generation models of Happy's 12 needle Voyager. We'll start threading using the needle 1 position, which is the front right position as you're facing the machine. So we'll install our cone here, put it right over the thread cone spindle, and begin. First of all, we want to make sure that the thread is not caught at the base of the cone. And every cone position on this stand, whether you're on the 12 needle or the 7 needle, has a loop directly above it. So the first thing you want to do is cut a fresh end and run it straight up through that loop and bring it forward to the next position. The next step after we pass these loops is to run it through the forward part of the thread tree, which is called the upper rectifier. To thread the upper rectifier, we actually run it from this side, which is if you're facing the machine, from right to left. Hold the thread as you would a piece of dental floss so that the thread's nice and tight. Pass it underneath this metal piece right here and continue on from right to left, and then over and down and then back under the two side metal flaps over here. So again, through this metal flap, going this way, and then over around, so the two side flaps. So again, one more time, up, over, and around to the sides, and so now it's passing from here to here, underneath ultimately the spring-loaded flap. Next, we'll run the thread through the upper tensioner, the thread brake sensor, and the lower tensioner. And we're going to run it first through the little guide or the eyelet at the top of the upper tensioner, and we need to run it between the upper plate of the tensioner assembly and the lower plate. The upper plate is pushed down by a spring, so there's no gap between the upper plate and the lower plate. But what you can do is pick this up, rotate it a little bit. You'll see that there's a notch in the upper plate that normally aligns with a peg so that it can sit flat. But if you pick this up, rotate the notch over a little bit, it makes it easier to pass thread through here, since the peg is now holding the upper plate a little bit above the lower plate, and now it's easier for you to run this thread. Don't be afraid to pull a little extra thread if that's easier. When you're handling thread, notice that you can kind of, with 40 weight embroidery thread, it's stiff enough, you can hold a couple of inches in front of you and point it so that you don't have to hold the very end. It makes it a lot easier. So do that throughout this, the threading process. It'll make things easier. So we'll slide this down, and we want to slide it. See this little guide here on the side to the left side of the stud of the upper tensioner. So it should, with the disc raised up like this, it should be easily run nicely like that. Then go and set the disc back to align the notch with the peg, and now it's actually going to help you because the tension imparted from this disc will help hold the thread in place as you advance it further along the thread path. So now this is creating some resistance, and it helps you, especially as you're threading. The sensor wheel will go to the right of this peg and then into the groove of the sensor wheel. Hold it low and run it along, and make sure that as you're pulling that the wheel turns. If it's not turning at all as you're dragging it through that, then increase the tension on the upper tensioner. Next, we'll go to the lower tensioner, and we're going to run it one full turn. So we'll run it into the groove. It has to be in the metal groove, and bring it around clockwise until it's gone all the way around the groove. Once you've run it all the way around, now run the thread into this little hook at the lower left corner of the lower tensioner. So we'll open the safety cover, the take-up lever safety cover, and we'll continue threading. First, at the top above the take-up lever, we'll pass it through this hook here, and then underneath the spring-loaded plate. Now, once we've run it through this hook and the spring-loaded plate, the thread's next path is to go down through the check spring down here. It passes from right to left through the check spring, back up through this plate, and up to the take-up lever, going right to left through the take-up lever, and finally back down through this guide plate. So it's going to make a downwards, it's going to make a right to left Z going down, then up through this take-up lever, and then finally down through this check spring, then up through this second small hole, up to the take-up lever up above, and then it comes back down to the take-up lever, and finally the large hole is the last hole that it passes through before it goes on down to the needle. So when you're looking for the holes, look for a set of small, small, and then large. So these three here are for the needle 1 position, and we're going to run our thread through. So we pass it down through the first hole. Once it's down through the first hole, pass it right to left through the round opening of the check spring, and then straight up through the small hole next to it, and grab it and pull it straight up. We're going to run it through the take-up lever, and finally straight down through the large hole that we talked about. From the large hole in the guide plate, right below it, you should see a pink eyelet. It needs to run straight through that. So here's the number 1 needle position. We'll drop it down through there. And now after that, we're down through to the needle. Okay, once at the needle, make sure that you have a very clean end to your thread. If you don't, cut a fresh end. Make sure you're holding on to about 1.5 inches beyond. That makes it easier rather than have a little tiny short end of the thread. And then you can see the thread is stiff enough that you can guide it and then poke it through the eye of the needle. Push it through from the needle from the front to the back. And then lastly, catch the thread and pass it through the wire half loop at the top of the needle. The guide loop helps keep the thread entering the needle into the groove more evenly. Before you dock that thread, pull on the thread, and as you can see here, make sure that the thread brake sensor wheel is turning and the lower wheel of the lower tensioner is turning. Make sure the thread pull feels steady, and pull enough to make sure that it's not caught at the thread comb behind it. Finally, pull the thread forward towards you, up and into the thread holding spring in the front. Make sure it's nice and tight with no slack, and cut it down to about 1/4 inch or so, and you're finished.